All right, we will get right into it. I hope you can see my screen. My name is Scott Martin, and I am with World Urban Parks. I want to thank you for joining this very special and international discussion today. We are so lucky to have my dear friend CJ from up north and my new friend Dawn from up north as well to take us through their planning process. And we're so fortunate to have these two professionals with us today, giving us their time. Before we get started, I'll run through a little bit of orientation. One, this is being captioned, so look for the captioning to be turned on if you need that on your individual screen, and the captions will also be, as I understand it, retained when this is sent out as well. With that, this is a World Urban Parks presentation, maybe a new group to some of y'all, but we are a collaboration of leaders from across the globe that primarily work in very large cities, medium-sized cities, and have really learned that just as COVID spread around the world so fast, the challenges, the innovations, the ideas in urban parks also move around the world very quickly. And we'd love to have you be a part of this dialogue and this discussion, as 70% of humanity now lives in a city. We think this is the future, and we're very bullish on that, and we think parks have a very important role to shape in what that means. With this presentation is from those of us within the World Urban Parks community in the North American region that CJ and I both have the pleasure of working together on across the border. And this map shows you where the membership is located across both of our fine nations. Upcoming for us, and I do want to draw your attention to this, November 20th through 27th, is our global conference. And surprise, surprise, 2020 rules. This will not be actually held in Albania. This will be held at your home kitchen. So you'll be able to have this come to you, and we encourage you to consider registering for it. It is just a couple hours each day. I'm going to share these links on the chat feature as the program goes on today to encourage you to take a look at it. But it's a way to peel off a couple hours each day and hear from folks around the globe who are confronting the same challenges you are in terms of the fiscal austerity we're facing. How do we build community? Learning from the Southern Hemisphere of what they did in winter in a COVID environment. All these sorts of things are what this group will share, and it costs less than 50 euros to register for it. So it's next to nothing, but a great way for you to engage with the global community and maybe pick up some ideas. So I'll share all that information for you, but we'd love to have you be a part of that project and that program. This webinar series is part of a series we're doing all year long, and our last one of this year will come up on December the 9th. This will be a very interesting discussion on really urban parks as landscape features, and we're very lucky to have two presenters, Tom Smar, who was Director of Horticulture for the High Line in New York, the Parklands of Floyd's Fork, and is now Executive Director of the Jenkins Arboretum in Philadelphia, and then Scott Stewart, many of you know from his work as a leader of Millennium Park in Chicago. Both folks who come from really the public garden background, but where's that dividing line between public gardens and public parks, and how these expensive gardens are different and take maybe a little bit more management to maintain in the public sector. So that'll be our presentation on December the 10th, and we'll put the registration up there for you during the chat as well. Again, a free webinar brought to you by World Urban Parks. With that, I will now shut up very shortly and say how lucky we are today to hear about Canada's vision of Parks for All. And CJ and Dawn, thank you again for making time out of your busy schedules to join us. And Dawn, we totally know you're faking it with the background on your screen because we wish we had that right now. So I will shut up and turn it over to you and be loading up those links on the chat bar. Take it away.
Great, thanks. And I'm also faking it behind me. Before I came on the call, I had to move all my stacks of unfinished work to make it look like I am organized. So I'm faking it too with Dawn. So thanks, Scott. CJ Noble, I'm the CEO of the Canadian Parks and Recreation Association. And as Scott mentioned, him and I co-chair the North American Committee for World Urban Parks. And we are making good progress and meeting lots of great folks through that. I want to thank Scott, the World Urban Parks, and EPLI for hosting this today. And I want to thank you. Welcome to our Canadian friends who are joining us, and also a special welcome to those who are joining us from outside of Canada. And thanks for your interest in how we here in Canada are putting together and implementing an action plan for parks. So before I begin, I wanted to do an acknowledgement. Today I'm presenting to you from the traditional territory of the St. Lawrence Iroquois, the Anishinaabewaki, the Algonquin, and the Mohawk. And I want to acknowledge that and the traditional owners of this land that I'm conducting this meeting on. So today, as you well know, we are going to speak about Parks for All. This is a co-collaboration between the Canadian Parks Council, who Don is the executive director for, and the Canadian Parks and Recreation Association. And we're going to talk today about what is Parks for All, what was the progress in building it, how are we implementing, and then we want to talk at the end a bit about how this action plan helped guide us and continue to guide us through the pandemic, and how we're going to use Parks for All and that action plan to help us recover from the pandemic as well. What's unique about this document, and we're going to get into more detail later, is that it's a Canadian action plan, the first of its kind in Canada, that's an action plan for the federal, the provincial, the territorial, the municipal, and the Indigenous parks community. And that's the first time for us, and we're quickly discovering that we achieve a lot more together than in our separate silos. Okay, Don, we'll go to the next slide. So to begin, I was just gonna, for those who may not know, give you a brief discussion on who CPRA is. We represent the interest of municipal parks and recreation professionals and practitioners. So we're the arenas, the trails, the pools, and the playgrounds in municipalities across Canada. And we're the summer camps and the yoga in the park, the swimming lessons, and the paths that Canadians use to bike to work. That's who we are, and we aim to be a voice. We do quite a bit of advocacy to the government to ensure that legislation, regulations, and policy are keeping parks front and center. We also partner with a number of government agencies and national NGOs because we have mutual goals both in parks and recreation. CPRA is also a national network, a place for professionals, practitioners, and the parks and recreation community to come together and to network and to learn and to grow from each other. And finally, we provide service to the sector through professional development, education, tools, and guides. Go ahead, Don. What's unique about CPRA is that we don't have individual members. We are structured that we have 13 members, and those are the 13 provincial and territorial associations for parks and recreation. And so that brings a very unique perspective to the work we do. We have representatives from Arctic communities to Pacific coastal communities to downtown Toronto. And that, I think, is what is valued by our partners and by the government, is that broad network that we bring to the table. We have board members, task groups, advisory groups, and I want to particularly mention that we have a parks task group that is a representative from every province and territory that works in municipal parks, and they advise our board on where our priorities should be in this area. And I'm sure you all find this, that when it comes to parks and recreation, we just touch on so many issues, whether it's physical health, mental health, justice, housing, Canadians, new Canadians, systemic racism, sport, that the number of partners we collectively work with to move the agenda forward is really numerous. Go ahead, Don. So as I mentioned, one of the things CPRA does is national policies. And some of you may have heard of our national policy for recreation. It's called the Framework for Recreation. It was developed in 2015. So this year would have been our 5-year anniversary, and we had a number of different activities planned to celebrate that. But with COVID, we actually celebrated the framework in a different way, using it as an invaluable anchor and to remind us of our common goals as we worked our way through the crisis. When we created it in 2015, the unique element of this is that we co-created it with the government. So it's owned by CPRA and the government. And I think you can all attest to how much easier it is when you have a policy that you co-created, instead of a case where the sector is working to convince the government or the government's working to convince the sector of the value of a framework. So this one is co-owned, co-produced. We had 3 years of consultations, 3 national consultations, and a number of regional, online, and in-person discussions to make sure that the framework represented the vision for all Canadians involved in parks and recreation. And we had a writing committee, and I can tell you that every word in the framework probably took us a week to agree to, but we know that we got it right. We have the visions, the values, the principles, and then the goals. And for this particular presentation, I bring your attention to goal 3, which is connecting people and nature. And for CPRA, the framework, and in particular that goal, was a real driving force to us to embark on the development with CPC of Parks for All. So I'll turn it over to you now, Dawn, for a bit.
Got to make sure I'm unmuted, but thank you, CJ. And thank you so much. It's wonderful to co-chair or to co-present this with you. I also wanted to thank the World Urban Parks Organization for inviting us to present this collaborative body of work with everybody. We're really proud of it and proud of the partnership that we started together back in 2015 to undertake this work. And really, before I get started, I also want to share, just like CJ did, just how grateful I am to be living, learning, working, and playing on the land within the Williams Treaty of 1923, which was signed by the Mississauga Chippewa nations. And it's really important for me to say that and also draw your attention to the fact that I want to acknowledge my home and place here in Peterborough, Ontario, which is just north of Toronto in Canada. And it's on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississauga and Anishinaabe. And I hope throughout this presentation, all of you who are listening are going to be able to gain a bit more of an understanding about why both the CPRA and the Canadian Parks Council have really learned recently. I would say this is pretty new, but we have learned that it's absolutely imperative to be working with our Indigenous partners across the land whenever embarking on action plans that have an influence and an impact on the land and nature that we all share and care deeply about. So with that, let me introduce you to the Canadian Parks Council. So as CJ said, I'm the executive director of this great organization that was established back in 1962. And its whole purpose is to share information and to coordinate action amongst Canada's national, provincial, and territorial park agencies. So you can see the map that's on this slide in front of you. All of those places that are highlighted in gold and maroon, those represent the parks and protected areas that are managed by the members of the Canadian Parks Council. And when you look at that map, those places represent over 2,700 different parks and protected areas in Canada, from urban regions out to very remote and rural areas. They also represent about 7.5% of Canada's total land base, which is over 750 thousand square kilometers. And for my American friends, I decided to do the math. That's about 290,000 square miles, which is, and I always love these kinds of comparisons, equivalent to the size of Texas, Vermont, and New Hampshire. Just for those of you that can maybe picture that. It's quite a significant land base. And so this council also together, there was a study based on the economic impact of the contribution of these places to the Canadian economy, but they generate about $2.4 billion worth of labor income and which is also about $337 million worth of tax revenue for the governments that are members of the CPC. So they're fairly significant. And so between the whole membership that CJ just articulated within the CPRA and the Canadian Parks Council, we are networks of networks. And when we came together, we really wanted to figure out how collectively we could develop a common vision and some actions that would help progress our work together. And along the way, we've met some others. So you'll see along the bottom of this slide here, these are the organizations, the park agencies that are within the Canadian Parks Council. And throughout the Parks for All body of work, we've really been able to refine who we are. What is our comparative advantage and our special talents that we can bring to the table? And what we have come to understand is that we want to be a global leader in effective and innovative collective action for parks. Not the, but a. We recognize that we are collectively working along with so many others on Earth to try and advance similar causes. And our mission, and this is where I'd really like to draw your attention to the last 4 words that are in bold here, because the Parks for All action plan has really helped to identify that we are completely committed to those 4 areas. We commit to working together to deepen relationships with nature through collaboration, connection, conservation, and leadership. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about our strategic framework, which is very much formulated on where Parks for All has taken us, we're gonna have a link to the Canadian Parks Council's website and you can take a look at it. It's new starting this year to 2024, but all to say, the work of the Council is intentionally designed for impact. We're looking in everything we do to grow engagement, and we want to be able to share the greater park story, which includes not only the members of the CPC, but our wonderful partners on the land in Canada and elsewhere, so that we can grow a conservation ethic that cares about nature. So the other thing you may have noticed when CJ and I have been presenting is that, we've now told you about the CPRA and we've told you about the CPC. Hope you're getting used to those acronyms. But right in the upper right-hand corner, there was another logo, and it's #NatureForAll. We decided early on that we wanted to identify and brand ourselves with #NatureForAll. Nature for All is an initiative within the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And this whole entire initiative is based around the idea of wanting to inspire a love for nature. And the core tenet of Nature for All really is about the more people who experience and care about nature and want to share that with others, the more support and action there will be for conservation. So there are hundreds, if not thousands now, of partners that are part of the Nature for All initiative. And if you haven't heard of it, or if you're not yet a member, I just encourage you to go to the natureforall.global website to learn more. And now we are ready to get into Parks for All. And to do that, I'm just going to start off with a short video. This video is bilingual in French and English, and there are some subtitles there. So hopefully you've got a good view of your screen so you can pick up on the content.
Parks. We have always had a relationship with the land and the water. Our connection to nature is strong, yet we can easily lose contact in the busyness of life. Parks are places where we can still be in nature, restoring our relationship with the land and reminding ourselves that we are one of many who depend on the air, the land, and the water for our well-being.
Les parcs sont des endroits qui nous inspirent et qui nous enseignent au sujet de nous-mêmes, de notre histoire et de notre monde. Se rapprocher de la nature nous aide à renouer avec nous-mêmes pour mieux vivre, apprendre, travailler et jouer chaque jour.
Parks for All comes from a collaboration involving many people and organizations representing many points of view. This action plan expresses a shared commitment to caring for and connecting with nature.
Des parcs pour tous invitent chacun de nous à valoriser et soutenir les parcs et à en profiter sous toutes leurs formes. Des espaces verts urbains aux régions sauvages, en tant qu'élément essentiel du patrimoine naturel du Canada. Conserver ces endroits et s'en rapprocher nous enrichit tous.
Parks do a lot for us. What can we do for parks?
Sortez aujourd'hui. Faites un petit geste pour renouer avec ces endroits qui sont si importants pour nous tous.
Parks for all.
Des parcs pour tous.
Now I'll hand it over to CJ.
Thanks, Dawn. So now that you know CPC and CPRA, you understand that this framework captures the federal and provincial parks and the municipal parks. And as Dawn said, we were a little bit in each other's blind spot for a while, not understanding that we should be working closely together. And the Parks for All initiative really brought that opportunity forward for us. We began the initiative developing Parks for All in 2015, and it was informed by a multi-sector advisory committee, and it included 3 formal drafts of the document, 2 years of work and consultations on it, over 4,000 comments from 200 plus organizations or individuals involved in the process. So when we say Parks for All, we mean for all. There was a really wide engagement and consultation process to it. The Parks for All document was endorsed by CPRA and its members in every province and territory, and CPC endorsed it as well. I know that nobody probably needs more to read these days, but I really encourage you to read the document. It was penned by an Indigenous writer. It's beautifully written, and it really captures that Indigenous element of the parks community. It was printed, available online. It's in print. It's in both French and in English, and it really did pull together the parks community to common strategic directions and actions. Next slide, Dawn. So what is Parks for All? And what I want to emphasize is that it's not intended to be a policy or a thought piece that's to sit on the shelf only to be brought down once in a while by a policy wonk or an academic to see what we were thinking in this document. It is meant to be an action plan that inspires change, and it inspires it through practical actions and practical examples that are right within the document so people can apply what's in there to their daily work. And it's also meant to encourage the broad parks community who have varying objectives to rally around complementary goals. And that complementary goal is healthy nature and healthy people. And so we have both everything from conservationists to parks users. We want them, and we believe they do, see themselves in Parks for All. Next slide, Dawn. So you hear me referencing the parks community. And in this case, for our document and our action plan, it's very self-defined. If you care about nature and you care about parks, then you are part of the parks community. And that, as you see by this diagram, includes traditional and non-traditional members. It might be funders, tourism, outdoor play, scientists, health, Indigenous community, educators, conservationists. Everybody, we are hoping, will see themselves and see a role for them in Parks for all those that are in the community. And just as we defined in Parks for All the community broadly, we also defined what a park is broadly. That can be everything from an Indigenous protected area to a marine park, to a ravine, to a playground, to an urban stream. So we wanted to be inclusive in this and for people to see themselves. Next slide, Dawn. So like any action plan, that vision is critical to be the foundation. And we feel that the vision, again, of healthy nature and healthy people can really move forward, and people can all see themselves in that. The vision is really rooted in two things. For CPRA, it was rooted a lot in the framework for recreation, which I spoke about earlier. And for CPC, it was rooted a lot in connecting Canadians with nature. So there were documents and initiatives prior to Parks for All that really formed the foundation of this vision. And the vision suggests, as Dawn referenced earlier, that it's a very integrated circle. If humans connect with nature, they are healthy and happy. They then support nature. You have a stronger parks network, and it circles back again to humans being connected more with nature. So we see it as a very integrated vision. So now back over to Dawn.
Thank you, CJ. We also really wanted to underscore Indigenous voices in parks and how throughout the course of this entire Parks for All initiative, we have really developed a much clearer and stronger understanding about why Indigenous voices in parks is an imperative. Both CJ and I are non-Indigenous peoples, and by collaborating with our Indigenous partners and other leaders in Canada that represent those voices, we've really been gifted with so much knowledge along the way. CJ also noted that it was a young professional, a Métis woman who held the pen in writing Parks for All. We tried actually with 2 previous contracts when we were developing the draft of Parks for All to get the language correct, but it did take this amazing young woman to pull together these different ways of knowing, these 2 different knowledge systems, and articulate both an Indigenous and non-Indigenous voice in conveying what this common and shared vision is for parks in Canada. This slide in particular, I just wanted to share with you because it's a map of Canada which you typically see very straight lines representing our provinces and territories. The lines that you're seeing on this map represent the treaties and land claims in Canada. And what is interesting is that they do not follow straight lines. They follow the natural contours of the land. And what this just demonstrates is that the lives of Indigenous people throughout the millennia, they've followed and been connected with the natural contours of the land and nature in particular. And they are nature and they're not separate from it, just like the rest of us. And that kind of learning and understanding has been brought right into Parks for All. The other area which I think is been really important for all of us to learn throughout this entire collaboration is some of our understanding of natural law. And in particular, what I've come to learn through some elders and others that I've just learned through in this process is the basic laws of reciprocity. And there's 3 of them. And they are really becoming the heart of a lot of the work that we're doing collectively together. The 3 basic laws of reciprocity include gratitude, giving thanks for what you have, which really speaks to the importance of land acknowledgements. Respect, treat what has been provided with respect. And also generosity, be generous with others whenever possible. This actually really speaks to why collective action is so important. The more we share and are generous with our knowledge and our work and our love of nature and the importance of parks and recreation to the health and well-being of all of us, the more that we can do collectively through our networks of networks. And that is something that really was taught to us through our Indigenous partner relationships. And these are 2 different scientific knowledge systems and worldviews. And that's why Parks for All has become such an important document that's resonated with so many people in Canada. So with all of that context, which is really important to understanding really what Parks for All is all about, let's get into the strategic directions. So as CJ said, this to come up with these 4 different areas, collaborate, connect, lead, and conserve, it was a 2-year process of intensive consultations, discussions, workshops, refinements. But these 4 areas with the actions that are underneath each really do define the actions that are contained within Parks for All. So I'm going to hand it back over to CJ, who's going to start to discuss 2 of the strategic directions. Oh, CJ.
I'm back.
Hey.
Sorry about that, everyone. So yeah, I'm speaking to collaboration, which is one of the 4 strategic directions, really central and rooted in all that we've been speaking about so far today. And it's about those shared goals, the mutual respect, and the collective action. And for years, we in the parks community were working in silos far too much, whether that be government silos or whether municipal, provincial, and federal silos were not working together, or different players in the Indigenous community and non-Indigenous community, or scientists or funders or whatever the case may be. So that's what this is about. And I think that when we did this, we were ready. We were ready to put the time and the commitment and the dedication to working together for this. Next slide, please. So these are just some examples, whether it was training and continuing to train parks employees around the Indigenous history of the lands that they're working on. COVID for certain asked for collaboration when schools needed to use the parks more than ever to accomplish what they needed to, or post-secondary institutions. And collaboration is about working together to remove those barriers, whether that's removing the insurance barriers to students in schools using parks, or ensuring the safe transportation of the students to the parks. Another example of collaboration is working with the towns that are what we call gateway towns, that are bordering the national and provincial parks, and how we can work with them to bring economic benefit to them while preserving and harnessing the opportunity of working and living beside a park can bring. And then thinking outside the box in a collaborative way. Maybe we haven't traditionally worked with partners that are capturing the interest of the youth in parks. And how can we do that, and will we do that through working with skateboard shops or bike shops, or with technology to attract the youth and create that generation after generation of appreciation for nature. So connecting, 80% of Canadians live in cities now. And connecting to nature isn't always easy or convenient. And most importantly, it's the most vulnerable who live in those cities that have trouble always necessarily affording or being able to access parks. So urban parks, through this connection, become even that much more important. And I'm pleased to say that the speech from the throne, which is our sort of address to the nation equivalent in the US, that happened in September, made a specific mention to urban parks and investing in them. How do we build nature more into these urban parks? How do we integrate nature into recreation and community activities that are already happening in those urban spaces, to make those urban parks a gateway to nature for folks then to take the next step, so to speak, into a provincial or federal park sphere? Traditionally, this connection role has been taken on by CPRA members, those that work in parks and recreation at that municipal level. But Parks for All challenges how we all can have a role in the parks community to building those connections. Over to you, Don.
Okay, and I'm going to talk about the last 2 strategic directions, the first of which is conserve or conservation. This one really speaks well to many of the different roles that the Parks and Protected Areas Network within the CPC, but also increasingly the important role that urban parks have to play in connecting people with nature to grow a conservation ethic. So this conserve strategic direction ties into the overall vision that we have about connecting humans and nature, and showing that we are not disconnected, as we are part of nature. So to achieve success, it says here, we need to conserve more land in Canada, and the locations must be strategic and well connected. So globally, there is an initiative, a huge body of work underway by thousands of people and governments to increase the amount of nature that's protected. And in Canada, this is definitely something that we are undertaking. And as CJ was mentioning Canada's speech for the throne, we do have a political commitment now to protect 25% of Canada by 2025. And we're hoping too that that will continue to increase to 30 by 30. So some conservation examples, this first one around striving to reach Canada Target 1. This relates to what is called the ACHI targets, which talks about reaching at that point 17% of Canada. So now we're looking to increase the amount of land protected and strategically connected to the areas that are most important for biodiversity conservation to 25%. So within the Parks for All document, we do have very specific actions in there associated with that particular objective. There are also other actions within the Parks for All objective that talks about connectivity. And I love this one because there are all sorts of players now within Parks for All, and that continuum of parks, which represent those urban and municipal regional park systems like CJ talked about, but it also includes Indigenous protected and conserved areas. It includes private protected areas, those run by land conservancies and nature trusts. It includes, you know, in many cases, a lot of the space outside your front door, and so to speak, but it does definitely, we need to find better ways of connecting all of these places to preserve biodiversity conservation, but also to demonstrate that there are ways that you can move from an urban area and experience nature in your urban parks to then experience other nature opportunities in, say, provincial, national parks or other Indigenous protected areas. So there are a lot of interesting conservation actions in there, and what is wonderful about this document is that each individual and organization can find a suite of actions that will best meet the needs of their own respective goals and objectives. Now, leadership. This one speaks really well, I believe, to everyone that's likely on this webinar. We all represent both our own individual sort of interests, but many of us, probably most of us on this webinar, are connected to organizations that are striving to lead in parks and recreation and conservation. So there's an entire section, a strategic direction dedicated to leadership, which is about you know, empowering all of us to work towards a Parks for All vision for future generations. Our work is not finite. We are working to advance all of these goals and objectives so that our children's children, in many cases we're talking 7 generations, can continue to enjoy the powerful benefits that nature provides. So some of the leadership examples that are within the Parks for All document and the actions are in front of you here. And this document was completed in 2018, and I can tell you that so many organizations are already implementing many of these actions. Speaking on behalf of the Canadian Parks Council, just after this document, Parks for All, the action plan, was completed, we ended up investing in the establishment of a new organization called the Canadian Parks Collective for Innovation and Leadership. This organization, this new organization, is connecting park agencies to academic institutions in Canada. And the purpose of that is to increase our ability to have better and more informed, through different perspectives and viewpoints, research, so that we can manage these places more effectively for future generations. There's also been a huge amount of work investing in mentorship opportunities and professional development. Not only by, I know CPRA has very strong leadership in this area. The CBC is investing in this area, and other partners that are very close to us are investing in this area. Like the Sustainable Forestry Initiative and PLT Canada, that's very much investing in mentoring and youth career opportunities. So this is an important section, I think, for all of you on this webinar to take a look at. And it just goes to show what we in Canada are seeing as our shared priorities moving forward. So it's a perfect segue into this slide. But once this document was done, CJ spoke at the very beginning of this webinar about how we don't want Parks for All to sit on a shelf. We want it to become a living document that finds its way into policies and directions and a way of doing work within organizations and existing institutions. So we're working very hard to continue to have Parks for All endorsed at very senior levels and within organizations across Canada, because we see that as being a way to achieve collective action. And I just wanted to share, so when this document really was completed, what we decided to do is see if we could have it endorsed at the most senior levels really within Canada when it comes to our Parks and Protected Areas Network. This photo you see on the screen is a meeting of Canada's ministers, so top senior political ministers in Canada that met on June 28th, 2018. These individuals represent the ministers responsible for parks, protected areas, conservation, wildlife, and biodiversity. And it was during that meeting that our Parks for All action plan was endorsed. With that endorsement, it enabled the Canadian Parks Council to spend our entire next year of 2018 looking at our own strategic framework. And we were able to then build in the strategic directions and several of the actions that we felt we could undertake into our own strategic framework. So you can just see how the building of endorsement, it helps other individuals and organizations then take on some of these actions so that we can have a greater impact together. And CJ is also going to speak to this too, because I know that the CPRA has been working very hard to have this document and the work that it embodies endorsed at municipal levels as well. So CJ, maybe you could share a couple of examples there.
Sure. At the same time that this was happening with the ministerial endorsement, at the board table, the national board table of CPRA, the document was also endorsed. And that means that all 13 provincial and territorial associations sitting around that table had endorsed it. And as Dawn says, the next level is that we're seeing municipalities themselves endorse the document as well. And I continue dialogues with our national organization called the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to have them endorse the document as well. And essentially every opportunity I have to present at national or provincial or territorial sector conferences and conventions, I'm presenting Parks for All. People are wanting to learn about it and wanting to take that knowledge home to use in their daily work. And on that, this action planner is one of the tools that's been developed and one of the tools that we use at those presentations to get folks thinking on a community level where they're working, or provincially or federally or in an NGO, how can they move forward the 4 strategic goals? And I just wanted to pause for a moment and talk a bit about COVID and the pandemic. And I think that for us, we are now taking an opportunity to reflect upon what action had we already taken thanks to this action plan that was key to help the sector through the pandemic, a pandemic that continues and that we will continue to lean on this action plan for. And then I think the other piece we're going to reflect on over time is how can this action plan help us recover as a sector? And I think for many of us, when the pandemic hit, you know, panic hit too. And I'm sure many of us were running out the door without our toolbox. And this action plan was an important piece in that toolbox. And it was very easy to get caught up in the urgency of the day. But we're hearing lots of examples how people were able to now reflect and look back on how this document was a guiding force. When I think about collaboration in COVID-19, I mean, we were working with housing organizations and health and sport and schools like we never had before to make sure that everyone had what they needed. And because the needs were greater than the capacity individually to get through COVID. And so that was really important. And when I think about connecting, I'm sure all of you have had the same experience where here in Canada, the many negative impacts of COVID, there are a few silver linings. And one was that Canadians are more connected to their parks than ever before, and a whole new level of appreciation, particularly in those municipal parks when many people, that was their only option for socializing, or their only option to get out of a small apartment with 5 children was to go to that park. And it's just so many innovative uses of all of our parks, you know, movie nights and streets opening up, and suddenly city streets have become parks where people are going to walk and bike in a safe, socially distanced way. So I think that there's a lot to harness there in regard to the energy and enthusiasm and appreciation that's come out of COVID for parks, and Parks for All will guide us in that. So I guess just to wrap up, thank you to World Urban Parks, and Scott, thank you for hosting. Certainly again for EPLI for hosting as well, and most of all, thank you for what are very busy days, for taking time to hear a bit about what we're doing in Canada. So that ends our formal presentation, but we will certainly invite questions in the Q&A section or the chat section, and we can respond to those accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
I'll jump in and lob a question while people are maybe working up their own questions. If you could, for those of us Yanks, explain how recreation planning at the province level presently works, the connection between province level planning and then how their local governments respond. In the States, we have a process called our State Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plans, or SCORP, that informs what we do, but really doesn't connect deeply. And I think we'd all be interested in hearing the provincial and the city connections in Canada, if you would.
Sure, I can take that. I guess it's interesting. I mean, CPRA works in 3, so to speak, areas: sport, recreation, parks. And to keep it complicated, there's different jurisdictional elements to each of those. So from a sport perspective, technically that falls in federal jurisdiction, but recreation sport is coming more into play on a national level. Recreation itself is considered a provincial and territorial jurisdiction in regard to the, you know, direction and funding, but it's municipal organizations who implement it basically on their own master plans and own you know, needs of the community. And parks, again, it crosses that federal, provincial, and municipal line. One that we had mentioned, we were working quite a lot in silos, but are now pulling ourselves together. So the parks are owned by one of the levels of government, but we're trying to, as I say, work more closely together in achieving the same goals.
Mm-hmm.
Dawn, did you have anything to add, or?
I think the only thing that I would add, because my world is very much in that sort of intersection of the importance of parks and protected areas for sort of the health and well-being, which ties into the recreational element, is that at the level and board where I work, we're trying to figure out better ways of having a whole of government approach to the work that we're doing. Which means a little bit of homework on our end to be figuring out, you know, how do our parks and protected areas tie into those different, you know, health and education and recreation agendas at the different levels of government. So I would say we're sort of at the beginning of that, but we're recognizing a whole of government approach is something that we really need to be embracing. And through that, I think we're going to end up developing stronger relationships, which will be essential to kind of finding those areas of shared opportunity to advance. So we're not unlike you. We've got a lot of work to do in that area as well, for sure.
I also see, Dawn, and panelists or participants, I should say, there's a question that says, as we think about COVID recovery, what opportunities do you see for job creation, career pathways within Parks for All? And I have to say, we're very lucky to have a government that's very committed to job creation in green spaces, green jobs. Prior to COVID, our federal government sponsored a program. CPRA was one of the deliverers or administrators, and it provided a 50% wage subsidies to employers who would hire students or youth to do green jobs. And so that's tremendous. And as Dawn said, we're just signing off CPRA on another one with our federal government, which again is focusing on green jobs, and this time specifically on vulnerable youth. The success of that program is tremendous, not because, well, yes, because those municipalities were able to hire folks, but it's the after job survey response from the youth who all say that is a career that they weren't necessarily thinking of, and now they would. So I feel like we're in good hands with our government as a priority, and certainly, as I say, I think even our youth and our young folks have become more aware of parks through COVID and may see that as a space they want to work in.
Mm-hmm. Well said. And thanks for that question, James Bartram.
Question that I love that just showed up on Q&A, and this comes up in the States. How do we approach these conservation lands or lands that are in a land trust? How do y'all treat it? Does it only count if public access is allowed, or is there a half credit if some access is allowed? Kind of speak to the private lands in conservation. A great question, Janet.
It is an excellent question. And if you want, CJ, I don't mind taking a stab at this one anyways, is because with Parks for All, like in terms of the way we see the parks continuum, private protected areas, private lands are absolutely a part of this partnership. We all have a unique role to play in how we can best connect people with nature, whether they can physically be on that landscape or whether we bring to their attention the value that those places have through other opportunities, like working with the education sector, or just collaborating to share those messages in other parks and protected areas where there is an extensive amount of public engagement and education. I know here in Canada, we are developing much stronger relationships and an awareness of who those other private protected area organizations are at both sort of national levels and at regional levels. And it is through those kinds of relationships that I think we're better able to support the unique contributions that each organization has to play. So there's also a lot of work being undertaken within Canada, similar to the World Urban Parks Organization and sort of that national or the North American component to that. At the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, we here in Canada, like the United States and others, have national committees where we are collaboratively trying to identify who are these other partners that contribute. So absolutely, definitely don't want to diminish the role that private protected areas have to play in any of this kind of work. We all contribute to the importance of connecting people with nature together so that they continue to gain relevance in the years ahead.
Thanks, Don. I always also see a question from James in the chat that is there a community of practice for parks, gateway communities / municipalities that you could share? I'll let you speak to that, Don, but just before you do, I encourage you all to go to the CPRA website. It will link you to a new online community we've built called The Bench. That online community is there for practitioners and professionals to create those online community of practices. There is one specific to parks there. There is also all the information on Parks for All and a Parks for All discussion group. So you don't need to be Canadian to benefit from that, and I encourage you to take a look at it. And Dawn, I don't know if from a CPC perspective you're aware of that.
I do know that formal community of practices are being created by that institution that I was talking about that was just established, the Canadian Parks Collective for Innovation and Leadership. There are a lot of great examples of those kinds of gateway communities that exist, like in Toronto with Rouge Urban National Park, which was a national park established a few years ago. It was created as as an opportunity to be a gateway from Canada's largest urban center to other national parks in Canada. However, through that establishment, there's been great relationships that now exist between that new urban national park, the municipal park that are also within the vicinity, and community parks and private protected areas and others. So I think those are two excellent examples of where you could find communities of practices, either through the bench, which is an excellent new resource that has been established by the CPRA, or if you're interested in visiting the Canadian Parks Collective for Innovation and Leadership, that's another new area in Canada that you may be able to find a community of practice. And its website is cpcil or cipsil.ca. So good question.
Thanks, Don. I'm also looking, this one's probably a bit more for you too in the chat. There's folks asking about a bit more detail about the 25% by 2025 conservation commitment. How are the plans, or how will it be supported at a municipal level? And if Parks for All provides guidance on that front. And I know you're a bit more well-versed on that initiative than me, so I'll ask if you want to reply.
I will take a stab at it. I know in the Parks for All document, when it was published, we referenced the goal of getting to 17% because that was the goal that Canada had set at that time. We are now, as you know, the question indicates, we're moving to wanting to protect 25%. In Canada, and I would say every country has its own process for determining what counts. In Canada, we're working really hard, both with different levels of government, from a provincial, territorial, national government, but also with our Indigenous partners through our 3 different national Indigenous organizations. And we are connecting through the CPRA and have representation on that National Steering Committee through their the task force that CJ said, so that we're able to connect in with municipalities as well on that target. So together, there's all these different perspectives that are informing what should be counted within Canada's biodiversity targets, which is this 25%. So there's this entire very, well-defined document that, and body of work, huge body of work that talks about what counts, but we're all working collaboratively together to figure out how we can get to that 25%. And that work is very much alive and continues to be underway. So I hope that answers. And the question that just came in around, does the plan include metrics to determine success? For sure, it needs to be measured and monitored. And I guess here is where I should be, I'll put this in the chat too, but there's a website called, I should have had this, it's Canada 2020 conservation. I'm gonna just come up with the website because I'm gonna mess it up, and I'll put it in the chat, but it will give you all the information you need on how Canada is approaching the target to 25% and how it is based on science. It's absolutely evidence-based and is grounded in guiding principles related to reconciliation as well, but it will provide additional information related to that. Oh, thank you. Scott Martin, you're the best. It's conservation2020canada.ca.
Great, and maybe we have time for one more question. I see one in the Q&A, and it's from Leon O'Hart, and he's wondering how we are working to remind people about leaving no trace. I apologize that I don't have a great deal to add to that. That would be something I'd have to speak to my municipal folks about. But again, Dawn, I don't know if you have anything to add on federal and provincial parks.
I would just say that we are all in this together in terms of creating a conservation ethic that will leave our natural spaces to future generations, and that requires sort of that idea of leave no trace. we should be leaving these places for 7 generations down the road from us. So that means being respectful and generous and caring with all the places that we go to and experience, including my virtual forest behind me. But I may leave it at that because I do know, Scott, you wanted a few minutes at the end of the webinar to say some closing remarks.
Well, now I feel totally lame because you guys have been so awesome as always. So I'll leave it with this. This entire broadcast will be archived onto the World Urban Park site, and our friends at Eppley and everyone will get a copy of it as well. I think you can see, we do a little mailer, we'll get this out later this week. We always have a reading list inspired by our speakers. So this is our little reading list today. And then because I'm a complete dork, I do a music list in honor of our speakers, and in full transparency, we did not put Nickelback on there because we forgive Canada for that contribution to civilization. So do encourage you to check those out. We'll get those posted for you as well. And one more reminder is if you need it, you're going to get it. The World Urban Parks Congress, the 20th through the 27th, I believe. A couple of these folks will be speaking as well. We'd love to have you be a part of that as well. And those are the links. Again, to CJ and Dawn and Kelly and everyone at Eppley, thank you all for a wonderful hour. I hope everyone got a lot out of it. Appreciate all the folks that hung in here for the whole length. We hope that you stay safe where you are, stay sound and stay healthy this winter. And if we don't see you, have a happy Thanksgiving in the United States and a happy holiday season to come. Thank you all. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.